Now as you can see, I'm just going to put a little bit, dab some on the corners and a little bit, maybe the first inch of the oil pan. We're not going to put any sealant across these parts. There's no need for that. Just mainly on the corners. And on the front part here, what I did is I put silicone on the outer half of the pan. That way any excess is going to squirt out and not into the engine. Same thing on the rear. And then on the outer half of the surface area, and again up here on the corner. That's all you're going to need. That'll be plenty. So now we're ready to put the oil pan on. We've let this silicone set up for a few more minutes. And the reason I do that is because when it's wet, it's really slippery and the gaskets can slide out of place. And even though when it's partially dry, it still has flexibility and will still conform when you tighten your bolts down. So just double check, make sure your gaskets are good and straight. Have a couple of your 4-corner bolts ready. 4 corners on the out edge. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those are the ones I like to start on to get this thing square and straight to begin with. We're going to go ahead and set this down, straight down gently if we can. Try to get it on there in one try. See if we can start a bolt here. Actually, on this pan, our big bolts are going to be the second one in and the back one. Alright, we have 4 started, so we're off to a good start. After you get the 4 started, look around it again, look real close and make sure all your gaskets are still in place, nothing moved. Because we only want to do this once, everything looks good. So we're going to go ahead and start by hand all the rest of the bolts before we tighten anything. Make sure everything gets fit in there and all the threads are started by hand. Then we're going to go ahead and begin to tighten them from the center out until we get them all tight. Well, now that we've got all of our oil pan bolts started by hand, I'm going to go ahead and just run them in until the gasket and the silicone surfaces are just barely touching. We're not going to tighten it yet. As soon as you feel a little tension on the bolt, you're going to stop there for now. Not really putting any pressure on them at all. We're just taking all the slack out of the bolts. Same thing on this side now. Alright, now I've got all the bolts tightened to what I call snug. And what you're going to do is just take a peek down here at your gasket. If you see silicone squishing out in some areas, or possibly not even touching in areas, you're going to know how tight you have it. So anyway, I don't see any air gaps between my gasket and my oil pan here, and there is silicone squishing out a little bit in some places. So I'm going to let it sit like that and let it dry for another 15 minutes or maybe even 30 minutes and let all that silicone in there dry. Then we're going to come back and tighten it down as tight as we need it to be, which is probably about 10 or 12 pounds of torque on these bolts. That way we're not going to have any gasket movement. All of our little gaps are going to be filled with sealant, and we're not going to have any oil leaks. I'll tell you that right now. Well, now that all the silicone is set up, I let it sit for about half an hour now, and we're going to go ahead and start tightening down these bolts the rest of the way. And we're going to start at the center bolts and just crisscross back and forth from left to right. We'll be sure we have a good seal on this. Pretty much have to judge when you're smashing the gasket and when you're not. Now, definitely don't want to strip a bolt hole out. But it's always good to not to over tighten these because you can also damage the gaskets. That ought to be fine for that side. Double check all these on this side here. Great, that ought to do it. Now another thing I do for two reasons, just one for cosmetic reasons because we're going to paint this engine, and also to be sure we don't have a leak. I like to fill in the little gap on the front of the timing cover with silicone after it's all been tightened up. So all we're going to do is the same thing. Just put some on your finger, dab it into the little groove and cover up that gap you have there. That's a pretty tough place to get back into after it's all put together and running, so this cheap insurance to prevent an oil leak. Fill up a little gap there. Once we paint it, it'll be a good sanitary thing. You won't even be able to tell. We'll fill it full of silicone. That's about it. And then again, it's also alright to put a little silicone on the back seal. As long as you have room to get your hands in here. Seal up that gap too. Just kind of putty it in there, fill up all the gaps. That'll be fine. Nothing fancy, we're just going to fill it in. You know that's not going to leak. Alright, well now that we've got the oil pan all cinched down and our timing cover on, I've taken a clean cloth and some carburetor cleaner and swiped and cleaned off all the oily substance that's on the block and the oil pan. Normally I wouldn't be painting an oil pan like this, but this thing has been welded on and it's pretty ugly looking, so I'm going to go ahead and paint over it, same color as the engine. We're going to use our gold dress-up kit for the top, but we're going to go ahead and paint over this. So generally, what you want to do when you're painting is you want to paint and put several light coats of paint. You don't want to just gob it on in one or two coats. That way you're going to get runs and streaks and a lot of imperfections in your paint job. Just make sure everything's clean, dust and lint free. Give it high temperature engine enamel. Usually one can will paint the whole engine. If you do it right and don't waste any paint. So anyways, we're going to go ahead and give this thing a shot of paint here. And then we're not really going to be too concerned about how good we get it painted down towards the bottom by the cylinder. We'll do that after we bolt the cylinder heads on. We're just going to get from here up. Otherwise we're going to take a chance on painting inside the engine. We don't need to do that right now. Give it a nice little even shot all the way across. We're going to do a few few light coats. No sense in being in a hurry if we want to do the job right. People like to paint their Chevy engines the Chevy orange color, but I don't find that to cover as well as black or blue. You use a lot less paint if you use black or Chevy blue, a dark blue. That's up to your style though. Alright, well we have 2 light coats of paint on there and it seemed to cover pretty good. We're going to go ahead and let that dry a while, about a good 30 minutes or so, and we'll put one more coat on and then we're going to turn this motor over and build the top end.